Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of our Fullcast Fireside Chat. I'm your host, Tyler Simons. I head up customer success here at Fullcast, and we are a go-to-market planning and execution platform. Our goal today is to find out if RevOps really is the steward of data. I think we're going to get into some meaty data topics, which may be fun, may not be fun. I don't know. We've got Ryan Milligan here today and Liz Christo. Ryan, why don't you go ahead and give us a brief introduction?
Great. Thanks for having me, everyone. My name is Ryan Milligan, Senior Director of Revenue Operations at QuotaPath. QuotaPath is a commission tracking software that allows RevOps and finance teams to build comp plans and share them with their sales teams, and enables sales teams to actually forecast what they're going to earn and have more visibility into their commissions, which is great. I'm a bit of a data junkie myself, SQL writer, dashboard builder. So I'm excited about this topic for sure.
And Liz.
Absolutely. My name's Liz Christo. I'm a partner at Stage 2 Capital, where we invest in B2B software companies, really from like the seed to the A range. QuotaPath is in our portfolio. And so we were talking about doing this fireside chat. I looked back at my history and thought, okay, you worked in sales operations for about 1 year, 15 years ago. So you are like the absolute expert. And then I thought maybe there's somebody else to bring in who might have a more current view of the function. So I'm happy to speak to like the high level and across our portfolio. And Ryan very much lives in this day to day, which is awesome.
Well, let's get started. And Ryan, you and I were chatting before this call, and you're going to have very interesting context in terms of this first, tee up question, because you've had some different roles there. But how has data integration actually changed over our last, let's say 10 years?
Yeah, so I think the biggest change has been how easy it is to connect all of your data sources and pull your data into one place, but then also how disparate the sources of data have become. On the easy side, we were talking before, after undergrad, I went to work at Wayfair.com, and I remember we had a 15-person, at the time now 50, 60-person BI data architecture, data processing team that wrote these crazy SQL scripts and had these DAGs with these FTP server uploads to pull all the different data together. And now you look at all of these ETL, this is pre a lot of the ETL players and a lot of pulling from sources. So it's really easy to get, how much has changed? It's really easy to get all of your data from all of your different sources into one place using the Fivetrans or the various ETL tools in the space. With that easiness does come a broader set of sources of data. And those sources, especially in your sales tech stack, sales tech tools aren't necessarily known for their reporting. It's not a thing that I've always seen them investing as much of their time in. And so what a lot of teams are doing is pulling, from your email cadence platform, from your CRM, from your product, from your demo booking tool. You have all these disparate sources of data. And the challenge is, how do you pull those all into one place and then drive actionable insights from all of those different sources of data?
Interesting. Now, we'll get into that. I think we're going to talk more about exactly how we're going to do that. But I would be interested to hear from Liz and what her perspective is on how things have changed, and maybe even touch on, and this may be for later or not, but I think it would be interesting to just hear how that affects, because you're the portfolio level, right? And you're trying to think about metrics and KPIs, and there might be some difficulty in just trying to aggregate all that and measure that.
So I guess just trend-wise, I think one of the core things I'm seeing, and I'm really intrigued to see what you both think, is the shift actually away from the CRM as the system of record. And so for a long time, it was how do I get all my stuff into either HubSpot, Salesforce? And I think there's a number of reasons why, and I can happily enumerate on those. But we are seeing a shift where everything's getting pulled somewhere else that's centralized. And CRM is one data input. It's no longer we're trying to retrofit everything into Salesforce, which I think is a real win, to be clear. That was really tough and really slow, but it is a really big shift. I think it's only happening recently, in the last few years, I've really seen it take off. And I think in my mind, there's a couple of different reasons why that's happening. And Ryan spoke to one of them already, which is just there is a lot more sales tech. So we have a lot more data and we're just like creating this like proliferation of data points. The second thing I'm seeing is like product-led growth and the rise of bottoms up, and all of the requests for usage-based data and integrating product data with sales data has created yet another layer of both complexity and data points to deal with. And then the third is I blame VCs like myself. We are creating much bigger asks for teams way earlier in the life cycle of a company than I think we ever have in the past. And those three things together are creating this like massive need and also like repository of a lot of data way earlier in the life cycle of a company.
Yeah, so I want to touch on the Salesforce thing. I'm so glad that you brought that up because it's one of the things that like, and a lot of people will still think this way, and I do see it changing where like everybody wants to put everything in Salesforce. And there are some instances that I've seen where they build custom object upon custom object upon custom object to like measure historical data of whatever it is, not just like thinking about opportunity.
12 and a half seconds to load the lead page.
Yep. So that's for one. And two, there's the product problem where everyone wants the product usage data and they think about Salesforce as the source of truth for that, right? They're going to put it into Salesforce and then run into so many problems with like, oh, now we've got all this product data being piped in, so we can't touch our customer accounts. And then you build like inflexibility with like making changes to Salesforce. So then the sales reps are dealing with this whole complex product and have problems and so on and so forth from there. So I'm curious to hear a little bit about, you know, where RevOps actually starts to fill or like fit into this whole data world and what role they can play to stand up a data practice and then manage that data ongoing.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the stage of the company. I think that's the first caveat you're going to have, clearly. My personal experience, you know, coming into QuotaPath, Series A business, we were pulling all of our different data sources on CSVs from Salesforce, from Stripe, from our web application, and then running VLOOKUPs in Google Sheets to build reports for the board. So we had no central data warehouse. We had no data visualization tool. And those were, as a SQL junkie, like priority number one for me. I care very deeply about data transparency. And so a lot of my focus.
Those were also probably multi-hour minimum commitments to answer like simple questions, right?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
How many customers, you know, ran payouts in their first 90 days or something would take like, you know, weeks to get together.
Wild.
Yeah, exactly.
And this is why people end up doing anecdotal stuff, because it's too difficult. It's too much work. It's not too difficult. It's just so much work to do that you're just like, you know, I think 30% of our customers are doing this.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway.
And I think one of the things is that where RevOps plays a really big role is RevOps is typically the one owning the sales tech stack. And so one of the big things you have in your sales tech stack is a desire to pull all the corresponding data about how things are going. And when you've seen the proliferation of these, basically a lot of point solutions in your sales tech stack, they don't talk to each other really, really well from a data perspective, right? So you're sending emails and enrolling people in these cadences with one tool, and then they're booking a demo with another tool, and then they're using your web application, and then you have some customer health data in another tool. If those things aren't all talking together, like RevOps is who stood all those up. And so there's a natural linking into RevOps kind of owning the data side and the data aggregation of those tools. I think what I'm seeing a lot in the market is RevOps is now evolving from just ops, you know, wrapped sales ops and marketing ops combined into this new term of RevOps, to actually RevOps and analytics. And when I think about the future of my team, I actually think about the operators and the analytics people in two pillars of the team that I'm building over the next 6 to 12 months. And so one of the things that's been really interesting for me to watch is how do you shift that thinking within your organization, where people who were in sales ops or marketing ops roles who historically might not have been as analytically focused or quantitatively driven, who are real connect the pipes operators, are they growing into an analytical capacity, or are you hiring other people in an analytics function and bringing them into your RevOps department. So those two kind of sides of the coin work side by side.
I'm going to add a third leg to your stool so it becomes a stool instead of a coin. But I do think I agree with the ops and analytics. And I think the third one is planning. And I think more and more RevOps is going to play a really critical role in forward-looking planning. And I already see that happening in your business, like where you're connecting with finance on a very regular basis. Like early in the life cycle of a company, finance is taking a lead on building, the multi-year model, but very quickly, like RevOps is playing a really critical role in doing the bottoms-up planning and actually being like the person who holds all the informing data to that plan.
We have customers already in meetings and working with finance, discussing what next year is going to look like. And it is a mutual role now that you sit down and figure that out. And it's not just like finance handing over a number anymore and saying, go hit this and figure it out.
Which is good.
Yeah. I think RevOps and sales, everyone's happy about that. But so it is, we are at least starting to see that being brought earlier and earlier, and that's bigger. I want to ask a dumb question. In your world, when you say analytics, right, and you're talking about these, we have everybody that's used to doing like the traditional sales ops role or the marketing ops role, and you're talking about, hey, how do you you want to see them become more analytical? Like, what does that mean to you, and what's your goal for them?
Yeah, a lot of it is data storytelling. So Liz is on our board. And so we have a bi-weekly check-in with our board where my team puts together 15, 20 slides that tell the narrative of the business. That is, here are the targets that we set for ops created, demo occurred, qualified, and closed won. Here's the ASP targets we had for those. Here are the conversion rates that we were looking at. Here's the mix of pipeline. It's a lot of, and then here's marketing and marketing qualified leads, and here's product adoption, and it's all this different data. Analytics to me is how do you tell the overarching story of the business? We hit our target and here's why. We missed our target and here's why. Here are the 3 drivers we need to change, the 3 things we tactically need to change in order to hit our target for next quarter. Here's the amount of volume we need to build from an outbound perspective. It's more data storytelling. I think that a lot of times, from what I've seen from former ops roles or people in RevOps roles more traditionally, the ask is, hey, can you go build a dashboard with X, Y, and Z? And more you're seeing the need for RevOps to move from dashboard builders and pipe connectors to actual data storytellers who are giving kind of the broad, both qualitative and quantitative view of the business to just decide what to do next and how to move forward.
I totally agree with that. The one other thing that I don't know if you think you're doing this, but I look at the role right now as answering the questions we're not asking. And I think often RevOps is closer to the data and therefore asks better questions and tries to serve up insights that no one was necessarily looking for. And I mean that in a good way, not you're answering extraneous questions, you're thinking 2 steps ahead of everyone else and saying hey, you're asking this question, but really 2 levels down is this third problem, and this is really what we need to be working on.
And I think that's a really good point. I think one of the things that I've seen as I coach people in our org and in other orgs that I mentor and what have you, is a lot of the traditional path to RevOps has been either an individual rep who wants to move to a more operational side of the business, or a Salesforce admin who wants to move into more continue operationally. Those 2 backgrounds are not SQL writing, data analytics, storytelling backgrounds historically. And so what I think is really interesting that is from an evolution perspective is those people are going to be asked more and more, hey, how do you take all this data and actually analyze it and tell a story? Or do you bring people to support, or what does that look like? And I think more and more there's a mental bifurcation of ops as pure ops, analytics as pure analytics, or whether one person serves both those functions and develops a secondary skill set, or you have 2 really different profiles within your RevOps team.
Yeah. So I'm also wondering if it's a shift as you think about coaching those people up from order taking and hey, I need X to let me anticipate and think through what I would want to see. Because you think about trying to teach that storytelling skill.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, I said time and time again, I think SQL is like one of the best things you can learn for your analytical career. I like it's a great way to get access to data really early, and being able to tell that story for sure is something that I care a lot about for sure.
One final touch here, because I think it would be really helpful to understand, like for people that are listening to this that are maybe just getting into the operations world, are there some things that they should be doing to like better prepare themselves for this? Like,
well, I think you heard it
be a
here
better
first.
storyteller. SQL.
No,
I picked that one up. I guess that's what I have to go learn next. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just a SQL fan. That's the thing that I work on a lot. No, I think one of the big things that I was talking to somebody about last week was, if you're not going to be the person who is driving all of the analytics, like building the dashboards and building the reporting, or if someone else in your org is doing that, you at least have to fundamentally understand your data architecture. You have to know, okay, here are the tables and how they're laid out. This is at the opportunity level. This is at the contact level. Like, you need to know your data model and be able to draw it on a piece of paper. This one account can lead to many contacts, and each opportunity has one primary contact. And you need to really be able to understand at least your data model, so you can structure requests from an analytics perspective in a way that you can avoid those gotchas of duplicate data or double counting or what have you. And so if you're not going to be the person running all of the analytics itself and like building a lot of that reporting, it's really understanding how the data is structured and where the sources are coming from and what level of data you can pull from your different sources, right? And ETL tools make this super, super easy. Take your cadencing tool, you can pull in cadence level information, you can pull in contact level information, you can pull in company level information about responses to cadences or what have you. So it's really like understanding the data levels and the model, and then how all the systems are connecting together. Like, what is the key that gets you from Salesforce to SalesLoft, that gets you from Salesforce to Chili Piper? Like, how is that data actually being joined together is a really good thing to understand.
Super helpful. So let's get to the nitty gritty here, which is, we talked about, we got all these spreadsheets. We're trying to like do VLOOKUPs. We're trying to build all this stuff up. And then we've got this whole perfect, like, we've got an ETL tool that's pulling all of our data into this perfect data warehouse, but there's probably like an in-between state, a starting state. And I was wondering if you could just shed some light on, like, where does someone start to move towards like getting control of all of this data that's coming from your different tools, and maybe some of the things that they should be thinking about when they're starting to stand this up.
I'm happy to start and share what I see as sort of like the normal journey, and then maybe you can jump in with like really what people should be thinking about probably sooner.
For sure.
So what I tend to see is what you described. It starts with like a lot of spreadsheets. There's generally like one or two people in the business who have like the insight that Ryan was just describing of like how the data actually works, how it connects, and can be like the putters togethers. And that is probably like founder, someone in finance, maybe like that jack of all trades, like early hire. And they are like bogged down in this whenever there is either a board meeting, a fundraising situation, or like some massive data request. And this can be like a multi-day project. And at some point that pain becomes too great. And then at that point, what I usually see happen is either they start to outsource and think about like fractional RevOps resources that they could bring in either as a consultant, maybe it's just a Salesforce admin that frees them up. There's lots of different ways to think about how to break this role up, but like you get something off your plate. And then generally that process of making your CRM more of your system of record. And I'm speaking like broadly in general terms here, like obviously depending on the go-to-market motion, this looks different, but there's usually like some tool that becomes the system of record for like a period of time. And then I would say there is a maturity level you've hit, and we can talk about what that tipping point really looks like, where you start to think more about like a data warehouse and actually aggregating data in a different way and bringing on full-time resources to own it. So I usually see it sort of like outsourcing and CRM system of record, evolution to the data warehouse as like sort of the natural stages in the early days. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, I completely agree. That's definitely the process I've seen. I think the thing that one of the parts of the question was where do you start, and like how do you think about it? I always start from the financial plan. Like, you have a financial plan and you have variables in your financial plan. Well, and if you don't, you should have a financial plan, but I assume the people on this call do. And if you have a financial plan, that financial plan has targets that you want to hit for certain things, right? It has the number of ops you're looking to create every month, the number you're looking to demo, qualify, close, the ASP, the expected churn, downgrades. Like, you have some sort of financial model. The first question you should ask is, do I have an ability to easily pull all those numbers as they stand today versus the model? And if not, that is like step one, is just, do I have an ability to report on the things that I'm driving and targeting towards? And the second piece from there to me is really, and this is what I've always done really early on, is lay out slides of like the story that you want to tell. Like, even if you don't have the data, lay out the slides of like, here's what's going on with our new business. Here's what, ASP growth and cut by these different channels and sources. Like, what are the things you would want to see? And then kind of work your way through that list sequentially because you want to, the biggest thing the thing that I see people run into is they get a warehouse, they get an ETL tool, and they're like, great, let me just dump everything in here. Like, let's just pull every different source together. And they don't have a plan for how to use it. And then you just have all these raw tables in your data warehouse and no idea what to do. So be very intentional about, hey, here's the data that I want to pull. It's because here are the questions that I'm looking to answer. And here's where I think the data lives to answer those questions. And then this is what I expect output to look like. And second to that, have some in your mind numbers that you think the data is going to pull. Because the worst thing to do is write a bunch of SQL and then be like 4x off where you thought you were going to be because you data cleanliness issue or something. So that's the other piece I would say is super important as well.
I have this fear of the unknown. And what do I mean by that? Let's talk through that. Let's unpack that. No, my fear is that I am not, like, because you had talked about like you start to dump all this data into the data warehouse and you've got all these raw tables that exist, but you're not really doing anything with it. I have this fear of like, I want to start small and I want to start to just track the specific KPIs that I know that matter to the business. But there's this unknown that 6 months from now, I'm going to want to know the answer to this question. And I decided not to bring this data into the warehouse or didn't decide to track it or set up this structure. How can you help me work through this fear?
Yeah, I think if you know that it's something you might want to track in the future, there's no harm in pulling it down now. I would just say it's going to be snapshotted. I'm not going to touch it for 6 months would be my, and there's definitely some data sources that are in our warehouse that I haven't touched that I know future me is going to run some reporting on. So that would be how I'd think about it. Liz, I don't know what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think like what you're basically saying, Ryan, is like start with a plan of what you need to get out now. It's okay if you bring in a lot more data, but like know what like questions you're trying to answer. And one of the things like on the flip side of what you're saying, Tyler, is like I worry about people pulling and working on and analyzing a ton of data that actually is never going to be used to make decisions. And I think more often than not, people like ask for things that they find interesting, but actually that aren't actionable. And it's like, okay, cool. Like I got this deck, I like read 15 things and I'm like, yeah, like this is all really interesting information, but then we don't do anything different when we leave the meeting. And how do we make sure that we're like actually spending people's time analyzing and giving information on questions that are going to make us make decisions or make changes? And then everything extraneous to that, it's okay to like keep it out there in the ether. Just like don't spend time on it when you have such short, like limited resources.
And if you're the person closest to the data, you're allowed to coach up and say, hey, like, I just don't think that's going to be very useful. Or my other more politically sound approach is I ask, if I pull this data, what are you going to do with it? Because
what decision are you trying to make?
Exactly. And then that allows you to push back and say, okay, if someone's like, I want to pull the number of onboardings that took more than 46 days. And you're like, I mean, I could do that for you, but like, what are you going to do with that information? To Liz's point, like, that allows you to push back and be more pragmatic and judicious with your own time, because you're always going to be underwater as an ops and analytics person. Like it's just, you're never going to swim your way out of it, because the more you show that you can do, the more work you're going to be given, because people love like access to this data. So you have to be very judicious with your own time and say, hey, like what exactly you're going to do, and how does this prioritize in this stack of like 15 other things that you're doing. Now, the other thing I will say is, like, we've talked a lot about the data warehouse piece. There is no shame in my mind at all about the CSV download VLOOKUP. Like, that is a very great place to start. The big thing there is you need to know that the systems that you have of record have the right like joining primary keys, like the right pieces. So like in Salesforce, for example, for us, we have our Stripe customer ID on the account in Salesforce so that I can map back to Stripe if I were to do 2 exports and do a VLOOKUP. We also have our workspace short name, which is like the web application of QuotaPath, so I can map to the usage data. So like if you're going to go that route, or actually regardless, but like the first thing you want to do is just make sure that in each of the systems you have a way to speak to the other system, so that you don't have some siloed tool that you have no way of joining to, even if you're just doing some VLOOKUPs, which is the best place to start.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because in these early days where like you're scrappy and you don't have the money to like build out these systems, that is going to be where people start. The other piece of that I think is really important is like where and how you store that data so that there's a historical record. And too often I see it's like literally stored on someone's desktop, which still baffles my mind that people are doing that. But like if someone leaves the company, like, is there a folder in Drive that you can go to that shows you like every historical data pull going back however long, so that you make sure you can actually like tie out when it ended up in that board slide in March? Like being consistent with where data is stored, even if it's not going to be in a data warehouse, I think is really important.
Are there any things, we're getting close here, and I want to give some time for us to just, give our final parting thoughts, but are there any signs of like, we're headed down the wrong direction with our data, essentially like a data debacle, if we want to call it that? Like,
I got a couple.
There are things that we gotta like keep our eyes out for. Go ahead, Liz.
Ryan, I'm sure you do too, but like the 2 that come to mind for me is like different answers to the same question, which I've had happen multiple times. Like, and it's going to be like really like obvious stuff, like how many deals do we close last month? Like, there should only be one answer to that question. Like, why is marketing giving me a different answer than sales, giving me a different answer than finance? Like, uh-oh. The second one is when people are asking questions of like, I want a slide that says this, not like, I want to know what the data says. So like when we're trying to use data to justify a decision we've already made, like that gives me like uh-ohs.
Yeah, I mean, those are 2 massive ones. I think one that I would add is if you have data that you're just not telling any sort of story with. Like if you just, I mean, the person who comes in and is just like, I just want to dump all this stuff in a data warehouse, that's priority 1 for me. That is a means to an end of telling the story of what's going on with your business. Like if the person in charge of your data should know, 1, they should all be the same answers to Liz's point, but should know the fundamental answers to these questions about the financial plan and how you're moving against it. So I think the big data debacle is somebody who is pushing for just tooling before they can write on a piece of paper the 5 questions they want to answer and what they're going to do with those answers if they go one way or another.
Data for data's sake.
Yes.
Makes sense. All right. So it's 12:30. Liz, why don't you go ahead and give us like a little wrap up? Maybe there's like a tip or a trick.
Putting
like
me on a spot here.
Yeah, silver bullet for just like solving all my data problems. Do you have
All
anything?
right, well,
maybe we'll have Ryan.
The silver bullet that I'll add first, and it's like kind of twofold, I think, is like bring RevOps into a business sooner than you think. And it's okay for that to be an outsourced resource, but making sure that like your data infrastructure and your tooling is set up well earlier in a business is like a really important thing to do. And then like the secondary component of that is like bring it in-house and like start thinking about what are the core resources and skills that you need, and knowing that you can always supplement with like additional external resources or technology or contractors. Like really prioritize what skill sets you think you need in-house and bring those in as soon as you can.
One, I agree with that 100%. One we didn't talk about was when you're in the buying process for a new tool, ask the rep to show you reporting It's never in the demo. Like I feel like no rep ever wants to go to the reporting tab of whatever sales tech tool they're pitching you, but ask them, hey, where's reporting? How do I get data out of this system? How do you integrate with any, data warehouse or Zapier or whatever? Can I even pull CSVs, whatever? Like, know what the data is going to look like before you swipe the credit card for, your big enablement tool, or whatever tool you're trying to use. And then I would say the other big one for me is, no matter where you are in your journey, like, write the, I always lean back to the titles of the slides. If you were able to show your board 5 slides, what would the titles of those be in a perfect world? And then from there, you can build the architecture to get yourself there. But if you don't know what metrics you want to report on, pulling all the data into a warehouse and spinning your wheels and writing some SQL or some no-code tool is a waste of your time.
Great. Well, thank you both for joining us today. It's been real fun. And Ryan, Liz, maybe we'll have you back on to continue this conversation some point in the future. I don't know. We'll see. It'll probably change in like 2 years. We'll have like different things going on. So it won't be SQL. It'll be something else out of there. I don't know.
I'm game either way. This was fun.
Awesome.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Have a good one.
See ya.
See ya.